Hello, my beautiful mates, Captain Mitch here. Today I'll show you how to sculpt a bookworm or a worm bookworm? Yeah, let's just go with that. Alright, so for the worm, I start by rolling out some pink clay and cutting it to my desired length. Afterwards, I roll it some more to make sure that I have an even tube and I round out the edges. To make the worm rings, I begin by lightly tracing where I want my biggest dents to be. Afterwards, I return with a sharp tool which I roll across my worm. By using this rolling motion, I can make a ring on my entire surface without raising the clay from the table. Later, I add a bit more texture and wrinkles with a blunt tool, also in a rotating motion. When I am happy with my result, I gently roll the worm with my fingers to blend the dents in, position it into an S shape, and send it over to cure. While we wait for the worm to cure though, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up to date with my shenanigans, and comment below what I should sculpt next. Speaking of the worm, after baking, I gave him a pair of eyes by mushing 2 black balls of clay and attaching them with bacon bond. Usually worms don't have eyes, but this one is a special worm, you know, he's not like other worms. He likes to read. For the bookstand, I begin by cutting up a tube of brown clay, which will become my supporting leg. For the upper part of the supporting leg, I use 2 balls of clay to make a pizza shape and a teardrop shape, which I mush together to create some fancy decorations for my beautiful fancy worm. After giving them a bake, I sanded my supporting leg and the decorative pieces to make sure that they were stable enough to glue together with bacon bond. To make the base of the bookstand, I pushed the supporting leg into a ball of clay, which I then blended in by rolling a silicone pen across the seam. Honestly, don't worry if you don't have the perfect blend at this stage, because we will sand it down later. For the book support, I measured and cut a slightly thicker rectangle. To make sure that I can easily glue it onto the bookstand, I sanded my decorative piece diagonally to create a flat surface. And while I was at it, I also sanded my supporting leg to make sure it was as smooth as possible. After curing the book support, I used bacon bond to attach it to my decorative piece, reattached all of that to the supporting leg, and sent everything to the oven. For the actual book, I started by rolling and cutting up 2 brown rectangles, which will be my book covers. After baking, sanding them down, and making sure they are relatively similar in size, I applied bacon bond and attached smaller but thicker yellow rectangles on each of my covers for the paper. To make my paper look more believable, I blended the yellow blocks where the pages are usually connected to the book spine and carved some horizontal lines across the sides. After I was satisfied with my details, I went across all the dents with a silicone tool for blending, stuck the 2 book halves together at an angle, and sent them off to bake. As a final touch, I created a book spine using a red clay worm attached with bacon bond. However, because book spines are usually not this round, I went back with a flat silicone tool to give mine a bit more of a boxy look on the sides. At this point, I realized that my book was way too heavy for glue to hold it onto the bookstand, so I quickly cut up, cured, and glued on a rectangle on the book support. It is supposed to mimic this specific part of a bookstand. Once everything was sculpted and cured, I went back to my worm and applied a thin layer of light pink using a makeup brush. This will help the shadow stand out more, and also give the worm a more wormy color. For the book, I added various splatters of watered-down yellowish brown just to age the paper. Once I was happy with that, I took some black acrylic paint and painted a couple of lines to try to mimic actual text. At one point, I dropped a bit too much black pigment onto that paper, but I decided to roll with it and I turned it into an ink splatter. It looked good in the end, actually. For the book cover and the bookstand, I went back with a similar base color to hide any sanding scratches, and stippled a bunch of watered-down shades of brown, yellow, and green for some extra dimension. However, at this point, I realized my worm was a bit underdressed. So I made him a cool pair of glasses by flattening 2 UV gel balls off camera. After curing them, I painted the rims black, superglued them onto the worm, and also superglued a piece of chicken wire to connect the lenses. I also painted that one black. Lastly, I superglued my book on the bookstand and hot glued all of my pieces on a cardboard piece that I painted black off camera, and covered everything with a generous coat of glossy UV resin. After curing my gloss for around 3 minutes under a UV lamp, my bookworm was finally completed. So let's see him in all of his glory.